And one of the key principles there is this theory that comedians are secret sages, that they deal with things that all of us deal with, but they go in deep to communicate fundamental truths that resonate with us in a way that makes us laugh, which again is important. So I thought, this is where I was going at the beginning, I thought it'd be a great place to start, that you could maybe talk a little bit about what comedy has done for you, also a very traumatic moment in your life regarding your brother, and how these things have fused together, and how comedy has been kind of a part of your spiritual path too.
Yeah, so I actually grew up in Boulder, Colorado, which is, you could say like the wellness, mindfulness, yoga, Whole Foods capital of America. You go into a nice restaurant and people are wearing their like bike shoes and their yoga pants, camel toe situations. So I grew up, taught that we should be meditating, we should pay attention to spirituality and this sort of thing. And I resonated with that, and at the same time, I would just spend my time laughing at these people because they would take it so damn seriously, and I would even be a little stifled if I, giggled in the shrine room when someone farted or something. And so I was very aware as a child, and especially a teenager, that like there's something a little bit missing here from this whole movement, and it's the ability for ourselves to look in the mirror, and along with the meditation and self-reflection, to be able to just go, ha ha, and take it a little bit more light, and I think that fun goes along with that. So that was a little bit the ground, and then as I went into comedy, I started to have a bifurcated world of this is my spiritual world, this is my comedy world, and they didn't quite know each other. And as I then had as I went through a divorce and I went through the traumatic sudden loss of my brother in a car accident, I really needed to do some soul searching, and I kind of turned to the comedy and it wasn't all there, and I kind of turned to the spiritual and it wasn't all there, and that's when I had this aha moment that there's some sort of magic when we bring these two things together. And I think we see this with Trevor Noah, Jon Stewart on The Daily Show. Not only is this some people's where they're getting their news, but this is where some people are getting a little bit of spiritual wisdom of like, how do we deal with the really fucked up things that are happening in our world? And a very good answer is often, with a light touch, with a sense of humor, and with, having a good time while we're doing it. Because if we're all going about our time being very serious and speaking very softly always, I think we have to stop and wonder if we're really doing it right. Because who's always smiling and laughing? The Buddhist monks, the great teachers of any tradition.
And there's this misperception that I think sometimes if you're laughing at things, that there's not depth to it, right? That there's not this deepness, that we're not taking things seriously as kind of like an escapism because we don't want to look at the pain of what's going on. And in fact, that's not really what we're talking about at all. We're talking about going deep into this stuff and still being able to laugh at it. And you mentioned a word there that just kind of opened up a lot for me here, which is magic, right? And I know I'd love to start down there with you two because I know like magic is something that we all talk about quite a bit, and everyone has a bit of a different definition of what it is and how it manifests in their lives. But I'd love to hear, I know it's not on the panel, but let's talk about magic a little bit. And Sarah, I'd love to start with you.
All right, well, I liken artists to modern day shamans, magic makers. I think that magic is truly the transformation of energy. And what's more magical than artists taking their inner thoughts and making them tangible into something that we can all experience in a way that normally would exist in this inner realm. So that's the way I relate to magic a lot in my own life and the people I work with.
And for me, magic, so there's magic with a C and then there's magic with a CK. So magic with the C is like the art of illusion, so pulling the rabbit out of the hat. But magic with the CK is the art and science of basically transforming what you want to will into this reality. So it's the act of like being able to take a thought and put it into action. And if you look around you, like everything is magic. Almost everything within this material plane first started as a thought. And if you can take a thought and create from that, that's magic. So
that was really, really well said. Michael, what's magic to you?
Okay, I got just an anecdote about this.
Okay.
So I'm a photographer, and Leica contacted me and said, hey, we want to give you some cameras to dick around with. And this guy ended up contacting a friend of mine and said, yo, he's experiencing black magic. Like, you need to stay the fuck away from this guy. Like, so, and I think that, so in magic, I think that magic is just making shit happen. So it's like everybody has something inside their head. It's like our whole world is just an imaginary world. We get to make whatever the hell we want out of it. So it's just putting it out there. It's just making shit happen, just making your imagination work and then doing the work to make it happen and then overcoming all the obstacles along the way and dealing with all the shit in the past, blah, blah, blah. But it's really just getting there. Just go make something up and then do the work and making it happen. And some people will use some like spells or charms, or I don't know. So like, you're like, I got some charms and
right
spells.
Now, actually.
Yeah, so some people are into that, and then other people are just like, hey, I got to sit down in front of a computer and I got to like bust my ass and deal with the hard shit for a minute. But I think they're both the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. Once you announce that you're interested in the occult, or you know, I've done all these interviews because witchcraft's super trendy right now. So then it really opens up my email inbox to the real opinionated people of the world. And I had a gallerist accuse me of bewitching clients into buying artwork, which I was just like, hell yeah, I'm bewitching everyone. What do you think advertising is? I mean, like, I gotta sell artists' work so everyone can make money and pay their bills. So I also love this idea of bewitching, like, bewitched by commercials.
It's interesting because when you're talking about magic, Michael, it sounds like you're actually talking about creativity, right? And that's a form of magic. And I think what's interesting about the link between creativity, and just to be clear, I'm not talking about just like making art or making music or, you know, drawing something. Living is a creative act. That is what we're choosing to do every single day, really is a creative act. We may forget that and go on autopilot sometimes, but that's really what's going on. So the process of being creative or tapping into your own creativity, your innate creativity, is a spiritual practice. That's when you're plunging into the depths of yourself to pull something out. So I'd like to hear, I guess, all of you have a different way of being creative. What is your creative practice? How does that influence your spiritual practice? And also, what does that even mean?
I'm looking at you, Kelly.
You're up.
Well, I do think that that magic is a key thing to look into when we're talking about creativity. For me, getting to that place where, you know, you're having holy shit moments of your mind being blown by creativity of your own or somebody else's. You know, you look at the Beatles. This is an example of how synergy of four beings in the creative realm, you know, with the help of spirituality, elevated them to something that this many years later we can all agree is total magic. And I think had they not done that kind of spiritual work and exploration and pushed their boundaries further and further, and therefore had their music evolve further and further, you know, we'd still be singing Love Me Do, and we love it, but they were able to really kind of go somewhere that transcended all of their egos, and I think that's why it's still, you know, kind of leading in most people's hearts of what is awesome music.
Yeah.
Can we, I just want to play with the word spiritual for a
Yes,
second.
I would love,
because you
please.
both spoke about it.
Yeah.
And then
It's in our topic thing there,
yeah,
so.
but like they did the spiritual work, you know, like we all, you know, we say that, but I just want to break out what spiritual.
Well, I appreciate that. I mean, honestly, this kind of event, I have loved tonight, and this has been amazing and very different, but this kind of like wellness, spirituality, mindfulness, like I get the heebie-jeebies the second I hear those words because
Totally.
it has been...
It weirds out so many friends, like
well,
spiritual.
A lot of people like probably might have wanted to hear these talks but aren't here because they're labeled spiritual. Unfortunately, as you and I have talked about, we don't really have anything else in the vernacular yet to fill that.
Well,
so we're talking about, you know, work that's on a plane that taps magic, I would say, that goes beyond our ordinary boundaries and that involves a lot of, you know, that's a little beyond your conventional mind. But do you have a better word for it, Michael?
No.
No, of course not. He just wants to the spiritual. Well, it's actually really funny. This event is called Wellbeing in the Modern Age. It was actually called Spirituality in the Modern Age, and we had an internal discussion about this that we actually changed the word because we felt spirituality was a loaded word for a lot of people.
It's the worst.
And you got
word.
like 10 emails from Michael.
Yeah.
Yeah, you would have.
I mean, but the thing is this is a really good question. That's why I stuck it in our thing, because I think it's important to identify what a spiritual practice is. And I also think it's important to identify the function, potentially, of a spiritual practice. A lot of us, probably in the beginning, when we thought we were walking onto a path, whether it's Buddhist or Hindu or whatever it is, we gravitated to crystals.
Crystals?
Yeah, crystals. I like crystals. I love crystals, truthfully. Whatever it is, I think a lot of us thought that we're going to get on the spiritual path, we're going to get a walk on this with this community of people, and everything is going to be smooth. Our life is finally going to start working out. It's finally going to start smoothing out the rough edges, and everything is going to be good. And I think what everyone finds out pretty quickly is the opposite happens. All of the shit in your life starts to pop up, and you have to deal with it or not deal with it, which is often a poor choice we make. And I think it's important that I mean when I say a spiritual practice, it's something that connects me with the part of me where I don't have to think about who I am, where I actually know, like, this is who I am. This is why I'm doing it. So the word is loaded, but as long as it's connecting you with a really deep part of yourself that you can grok yourself, I think that's what it is. I'd love to hear, truthfully, like what the word spirituality, from the end, starting with you, Sarah. We'll just go down the line.
What does spirituality
Yeah.
mean to me?
Because you're a witch.
So I've read the internet. I think that's an incredibly difficult question to tackle. I think that spirituality means so much to so many different people, and what really drew me to being really open about the way spirituality affects my business was that I think that I want to always trust my intuition. And so I use a lot of that, and I do have a meditation practice, but it was something I was really scared of being open about because of everything you guys were saying about this loaded word of spirituality, because unfortunately there's a lot of really bad stereotypes, flakiness, too woo-woo, and being on another planet, and that's wonderful, but when you own a business, like, that's really difficult to do. So I think it's important to break those stereotypes, have your feet firmly planted on the ground. But spirituality, for me, I'm not sure. I don't know how to define that exactly.
I think that's also where we need to create new languages for it, because it is something where when
Yeah.
people see, oh, you're spiritual, and there are tools. So all we're doing is just trying to find some tools that help us get through the day and help us, like, understand the big picture of what's happening today or this month or this year or this lifetime. But then when you walk in and you have anything that you have is like a reminder. Like, so sometimes while shooting, I'll bring my mala beats, and it's just a way that I can, like, okay, I can, like, pull back if I need to, or I have, like, a playlist if I need to pull back or whatever. But it does, when people hear the word, it's such a fucked up thing. So I think we just have to, like, since none of us can really define it, maybe we should just come up with a new word for it, or like a word to replace. And maybe because spirituality is like God, and then people already love or hate the thing.
Yeah.
And so we need to come up with, like, a new thing, or,
Yeah, I
or,
mean,
like, fragments of it.
It seems like a word that's somewhat inescapable at this point, which is why we keep leaning back on it. I think experientially what it means is something we do know what that is. We do know when we're doing spiritual work. I think a trap, and I would love to talk about this even though it's not specifically on the panel, is spiritual materialism or spiritual bypasses, and using these identities that may seem exotic, or someone has wisdom that we can go and bring to ourselves and then will be wise. Where I think another aspect of a spiritual path is discovering that this stuff is in you already. You're not going to go find something else out there, attach it to your identity, and then you'll be whole. It's really just a process of uncovering this stuff, and that to me is like what spirituality is. It's that constant process of digging until you get to the part where you're like, okay, that's it. That's who I am.
What's spiritual bypassing?
Spiritual bypassing is being like, okay, I don't have to worry about being a dick to that person because I'm conscious of it. I'm an elevated person. I don't have to deal with that problem. I'm an enlightened
We're like,
being.
I'm so unattached that
yeah.
I can, sleep with a million women and not worry about what it means to my partner because
Right,
I'm above it.
It's like the exact, no, it's so
I know,
true.
I've met that guy. Know that guy.
It's basically something that you use to not deal. It's the worst thing you can do on a spiritual path. You're basically using something else to distance your own self from what you should be working on. I mean, I guess I'd like to shift the conversation a little bit to, again, the aspect of being creative and kind of living our lives and how this is manifested in all of our lives. We've each taken relatively different paths to creativity, spirituality, comedy in your case. I mean, at what point did you kind of shift and acknowledge that, like, all right, this is what my life is. This is something that's important. We're all here at this event, so we've made that choice at some point. Jen?
So for me, growing up, I grew up with an occultist grandmother that read Aleister Crowley and H.P. Blavatsky, and I didn't have religion in my life. I had this free thinker, and like in our house growing up, she had Hieronymus Bosch's God and Earthly Delights painting next to Goya's Saturn Devouring Its Young. So this is like a screenshot of my childhood. So growing up with this, it was like very hard, especially in the area that I was in. It was very like waspy and very Christian, and I got made fun of a lot. So as I grew into adulthood, I closeted a lot of my beliefs, and I would just read to myself. Everybody knew I read oracle cards, but I would never like open that door completely. But then in 2012, I was actually working in a pop culture blog, of all places, for a reality star who shall remain nameless. But I really got into the Mayan calendar, and I was like, oh, this is great, viral content, whatever. But then I went deeper down the rabbit hole, and I'm like, apocalypse, what does this mean? Is this happening? Is the world going to end? And it just sent me on this whole journey towards like understanding what that word apocalypse meant. And really ultimately what it meant was revelation of truth. So after a series of psychedelic journeys and synchronicities, I just said, fuck it. Like, I have to come out of the closet and talk about what I believe in. And I just want to create what I want to see exist in the world for somebody that was like me, that was a seeker and trying to find something to relate to. And like ultimately, like answering your question from before about what spirituality means, it's like, the word is hard, right? But for me, it's learning to find a way to have a relationship with the universe and with nature, and understanding those patterns and what that really means for my life here. And the universe is ultimately chaotic. And one of my favorite axioms is out of chaos comes order. So it's like, how do you find a way to create through the chaos and find order through the disorder? So.
Which is exactly what we're doing. Living, that's literally what we're doing, whether we want to dwell on that or focus in on it. This is a pretty chaotic world. We're all pretty familiar with that at this point. Michael, I don't know that I've ever asked you this, though. Like, what got you, we met, we don't have to go into that whole thing, but what got you kind of on this stuff? Like, when did you kind of make that jumping off point or transitional period into, like, talking about this? We talk about this stuff regularly.
Yeah, well, okay, so I don't know. It just happened. But it's like that with everything. It's gradual. It started, and as a kid, I was around spiritual grandma, and my mom was very spiritual. And then when I was doing art, it's similar to the comedy thing too, where it's like I was doing my art, but it was just two different worlds. It didn't make any sense. And then I started talking more about the spiritual thing, and then I was doing spiritual bypassing. I became that asshole, and I think that's when you met me, when I was like, oh, look at me, I'm so spiritual.
I do actually really remember that.
Yeah, that guy was a dick. And but it's like, it's still part of it. But then what I had to do is I had to recognize, like, now I feel like I'm in one of my better spots. Like, I feel much happier, and let's see what happens in 6 months and how that works out. But because now, with my art and with the art, I would kind of go with the dark stuff, like, and I would go for like, I like crime scenes and movies and films, and I like the dark shit that plays out inside the mind. Like, if anybody, like, I had this spiritual family, but my mom showed me The Exorcist when I was 4, so it clearly like started the nightmare dreams and that thing in my mind. But then where it started to make more sense is when I realized, like, how in the spiritual world there's a lot of this, like, love and light, and we just need to be calm. And there's this other side of ourselves that at the end of the night where we're like, we hate the fucking world. Like, I love everybody, but I fucking hate people at the same time. Like, not all the time, but there's a point where I just want to, like, not everybody, not all the time. And so many spiritual people won't won't admit that part of themselves. They deny that part. So when I was doing the spiritual podcast and I was like, oh, this is everything, love and happiness. But then there was this other side of me that was conflicting with that, where I was like, when I remember I was walking out down the street and some guy like honked his horn at me. And it was like raining and I was cold and I was like a broke artist and I had holes in my shoes and I was just like, you motherfucker, like you're honking right now. And the reptilian part just snapped on and I just like literally just walked over to the window and I pounded on it. I was like, don't fucking do that shit. And that's a side that a lot of people want to do and some people do, but they never admit it. They won't go down it. So where I feel like where it really started to click for me was recognizing that like this dark shit is actually really cool. I don't have to do it all the time, but if I can acknowledge it and put it into the art, because there's a lot of people, like what you're saying, a lot of people are dealing with this stuff, but then again, if they want to go down that spiritual path,
right.
It's like, let's cleanse it all. Let's clean it all out.
We have to have angel wings on or something.
Yeah, and it's like, fuck you. Like, fuck you for trying to tell me that I need to like clean it all. That's part of me. That's part of who I am. And it's a part of a lot of people. And so, you know, with my art, I've had my art in the past. I loved my art. And I'm at the point, you know, we're rebuilding my website and I'm like, I don't want that old shit. I want this new stuff because the new stuff is more fun. It's really acknowledging the full spiritual self. And I don't call it my spiritual self, but it's like, it's the full part of where it's like, it's the good, it's the happy, it's the laughter, it's the joy, it's all that happiness. And it's also the fuck that shit. Fuck this, fuck that, fuck that.
Well, I mean, I think what you just mentioned there too. Oh, that's great, and that's what we should be talking about.
Great.
No, it is. It is.
Fuck with the CK. Fuck with the.
It's their difference, yeah. No, I mean, what you're talking about is what Carl Jung referred to as the shadow aspect of the psyche.
Yes.
Right, and this is something that a lot of us, truthfully, all of us, do a pretty tremendous amount of work to suppress most of the time. And sometimes for functional reasons. It's not always appropriate to go and yell at people and say, fuck you.
No, I don't do that as much now.
Right.
But I did learn if you ride in the bike lane on your bike and someone steps out into the path,
yeah.
you do have carte blanche to say, get the fuck out of the bike lane.
That has happened to me, so yes.
I'm that guy.
Yeah, okay.
I'm still that guy. But I'll be nice and pleasant other time.
I mean, getting back to the shadow thing, I mean, this is how you can guard yourself against spiritual bypasses, is by acknowledging that we all have this shit in ourselves. If we're walking around thinking that we're just enlightened beings of love and light all of the time, yeah, just to be clear, I genuinely believe that. But I also know I yell at my wife sometimes. I get angry and frustrated when my little son does something that annoys me. He's 16 months. Like, that's a dick move. But I have to acknowledge that because a lot of things we've been talking about tonight really do tend to go around this word that's a buzzword now, which is mindfulness. And the reason mindfulness is a buzzword now is it starts with this very basic principle of being aware of what the fuck is going on. So that's when we start casting our glow and our attention in a certain place, and that also means looking at these shitty spots. And I think what you're getting at, Michael, and I'm glad we touched on this, is your art now encompasses every aspect of your being. You're not shying away from something. You're not doing what you did, Kelly, which is I'm a comedian here, I'm spiritual here. How did that work for you? I mean, you, unlike us, grew up in a spiritual community, right? I mean, I'd love to hear a little bit about that, but how did that work for you to kind of actually merge or integrate those two aspects of yourself?
Yeah, well, I think that I was really longing for that freedom, you know, to have that humor, and also really aware of some of the greatest comedy shows, I feel, the ones that have meant the most to me, were when I've been roasting my own community, the Shambhala community that I grew up in, and actually seeing that people do want to laugh at this stuff, and just no one's kind of given them permission to have fun with it, and just the awareness of the importance for any society. And I feel like we are building a new conscious, mindful, spiritual society here together. And in doing that, you know, we have to have the kind of court jester. That's the person who traditionally has kept the king and the society in check. So they have come together for me, but it really came out of this moment of heartbreak, of losing my brother and having an existential crisis of I grew up thinking that I knew what was going on because these are precious teachings of meditation and all of this, but I had a moment of really, what the fuck is going on here? And I turned to fellow comedians with my podcast, and I've been astounded at what they've had to say, because who's professionally sitting around thinking about paying attention to all the details and looking at the ironies and idiosyncrasies of themselves and others. They really kind of learn a lot. So for me, it extended my old idea that, sitting meditation is spiritual, to realizing that we all have a lot of wisdom, and it's often the kind of the bad boys that are over there laughing at the rest of us that have some real wisdom going on. They're not to be discounted in this movement, certainly.
Jen, I can sense you want to say something.
Yeah, I was going to say, I feel like laughter in and of itself is a medicine, and I think a common thing that also happens like on the spiritual quest is that we get to a point where we start taking ourselves so seriously, and that's like completely contradictory to what this is. So it's like really about like connection to everything, connection to each other. It's like you can be spiritual, but also watch South Park, like you can be spiritual and like find joy in satire. I feel like, you don't have to necessarily like put on another personality mask to be a spiritual person. Like, it's about becoming who you like really are and like laughing at this crazy world that we live in.
And that's very connected with the dark side of it. And actually Michael's work is very funny. If you look at it, like there's some visual jokes going on there because he's inviting both the light and the dark together. And when that happens, it's sort of like, those are both true.
Well, I think that, like with jokes or laughter, why it even happens is that, when you're putting a joke together, you're taking one idea from this side and you're taking another idea from that side. And so when you hear that joke and it connects, you have this spontaneous, like this thing that comes out of your body, but it's when your mind is actually, in your heart is like, oh, that's a truth. That's why when you see a comedian that kind of sucks is because they're not really speaking new truths. They're not putting two new things together.
Connecting two sides of your brain or making new neural pathways.
Yeah.
Happens when you get a joke.
Well, I'd like to, Sarah, something just popped in my head when you're saying this because you work with a lot of artists, and I'm sure you come across artists going through creative struggles, going through authenticity issues, and trying to get their true selves out in their art. What is that like when you work with artists who are going through that? Because I imagine a lot of your job is guiding them through those times.
Oh yeah, I think that I dealt with 3 existential crises on Tuesday. And I was like, can you guys please space these out a little bit more? We can't all break down on the same day. But like life is really fucked up. So I want to laugh every day. And I just think when you just keep going through the darkness, you do get to that light and you're just like, oh, what the fuck? And just, you have to laugh at everything, or what are you gonna do, just die, I guess?
Or just be upset.
Yeah.
I mean, your options are to laugh about things or to let it consume you. That's what ends up happening to a lot of people. And everyone, that's happened to every one of us. We've all been consumed by heartbreak or tragedy or trauma. And we hopefully have learned that we don't like that enough to try to find another way to engage with it. And that doesn't mean when your parent dies, you go to the funeral and cackling like a madman. That's not what we're talking about.
But you can.
You can.
Sure,
if
You totally can.
You can.
A friend had a death in her world, and another friend that when I texted them was like, like it was funny to them, and it's okay.
I don't think, of course, I mean, any reaction.
You have mean friends.
Michael's always going to take it to a place.
They're sitting next to each other right now, like.
Oh, man. No, I mean, I think that's important. And another thing I wanted to bring up when we're talking about this stuff is we're also trying to normalize this very tricky concept of spirituality. We've already talked about how the word is loaded and it's stigmatized, but it's also cool to be a normal person and be into this stuff. You can be, like Jordan Bach was talking about before, we were joking about being Jews for Jesus. We're not actually Jews for Jesus. I grew up Jewish. I love Jesus. Jesus is amazing. Like, it's actually incredible energy, and I totally believe in it. But I also like football. I also like regular things. So there's ways to kind of not push off aspects of your persona or personality and have them be integrated into what you're doing. I think that's what I thought this was basically about. How do we authentically live who we are and know that there's stuff that we can't perceive with our 5 senses, And Sarah?
Yeah, well, I don't think that we have to compartmentalize ourselves. I think that because of social media, we get to curate who we are and create these realities, which is wonderful, but it's also, I mean, you can't be completely serious all the time. You can't be completely present every moment of every day. So I think that it's important to be spiritual and laugh. I think it's important to encompass dark and light, everything, and it's okay to be that, and it doesn't make you any less spiritual.
I want to play with that thing about being present in the moment all the time, because I think that there's a time to be present, but there's also this bullshittery, like everybody's so focused on being present all the time, and when you're making the most creative stuff, you're not present at all.
Right.
You're in this other world, and it's an out-of-body experience. And I'm sure working with artists, the best work probably comes from the people who are just fucking out of it.
Absolutely. Those are my favorite people in the I want to go on those planets all the time. But yeah, I mean, and that's a lot of work too, to be so present. I don't know. I mean, that's good. I do.
And it
agree
also
with
kind of
that.
speaks to this state of that we can fall into the traps of thinking that we have to be perfect people, that we have to be complete, that we have to constantly be present, we have to mind our P's and Q's, we have to use right speech all the time, and then when we don't, it's okay. Instead of saying that's okay, like we didn't use right speech, we did not use tact in that situation, we can then beat ourselves up, which you wouldn't do that to someone else if you saw them do that. You wouldn't berate them and make them feel bad. So there is this aspect of self-reflection, and how do we use these things? I also want to ask you guys, because I know we don't have a ton of time here, practically, what does this mean in our lives? Like, it's great to talk about esoteric concepts and big picture stuff, but practically, how do you apply the principles of comedy or creativity or spirituality in your lives? I'll start with you, and we'll go this way.
Well, those are, I mean, that's, I feel like it's a pop quiz.
It is kind of, I mean,
those are all very different things, and they are also very connected. I mean, beyond having like a regular meditation practice, and I would say with the humor thing, it's particularly keeping a sense of humor about yourself and whatever you get really into. And I think that has to do with fearlessness, actually. I think it takes, I think part of why there's fear in this movement sometimes is because we all care, and we're like, this is really special. People have goodness and, awareness. And so we care so much that we're afraid of looking like we don't care as much as we do. So I think there's a little bit of a fearlessness to just being bold, being daring, and like Michael was saying with his work, kind of being who you are.
it's huge.
Which for him, as someone who yells at bikers.
I yell at pedestrians when I'm on a bike.
It's very
It's
different.
a big difference.
But kind of letting your balls hang out, so to speak, and letting that be a part of.
It's true. I mean, it's courageousness. It's fearlessness. It's being able to do this. And if you might be a person in the room who is laughing when someone farts in the meditation room, and that's totally fucking cool. That's like not a problem.
So
That's
cool
how
to laugh at farts.
I never grew out of that, actually.
Neither did I. Don't worry about it. So, Michael, for you though, like what practical tips, have helped you? No, seriously, in your life, what do you do when you find some situation in your life moving into your space, to your relaxation, to your inner peace? Like, what do you do these days?
Get into the space, or when I realize I'm out of the space?
When you realize you're out of the space.
Oh, well, okay, so this is, I think the most important part is just that, because I talk to friends about this stuff all the time, so that when they're out of their space, like, you kind of like are gentle with them, and you can be compassionate and kind of like let them deal with it, and then occasionally like feed them a tool that worked for you, because then when I become the asshole and I've lost it completely, then they look at me and they say exactly what I need to say. Like I had a really fun experience. I was doing a job out in Michigan, and the camera, a wave crashed over and broke the camera in the middle of the shoot. We're in the middle of the lake, and my producer says to me, "Time to be mindful, just be happy, breathe." And I'm like, fuck you.
Yeah.
Like, this is the last thing that I want to hear in that moment, but it's like, it just anchored, it didn't really anchor me. That's bullshit. It didn't anchor me. I was still freaking out.
Yeah.
It was an immediate, like, okay, now I got to start, like, toning it down. And I had to, like, we parked the boat, and I just wandered off from everybody, and I just did my thing, because I'm in the middle of nowhere with, like, no camera, and I've got to finish a job. But that's essentially it. I think that for me, the practical aspect is to have friends that I can talk to about this stuff. And sometimes they look at me like I'm fucking crazy. Sometimes I look at them and I'm like, I get it. And it's just passing it around. And then we continue. It's the idea of Shambhala. It's like lifting each other up slowly, slowly, slowly until we're in a more peaceful state.
Yeah.
Like maybe I can get a tandem bike with a friend and we don't have to be yelling all the time.
Yeah. And Shambhala, for those who don't know, that's Chogyam Trungpa's school or philosophy that is of an enlightened creative society, essentially. So it does fit into this. Jen, practical tips. I know I ask this at the end of my podcast all the time, so you've probably given some, but I think it's important that we do ground this to reality as well, so we don't just go off into space and, you know.
I guess for me, like practical wise, I don't have like a routine, right? I meditate, but not on a daily
Me neither,
practice.
yeah.
But I think that the most practical thing that I've learned and what I live by is to follow your heart and to lead first with that. So, you know, one of my favorite visions, I guess, is in the Egyptian Book of the Dead, right? Where your heart is weighed against a feather. And that's what allows you to like pass through to the next life. So I try with what I do to keep a light heart, and sometimes to my own detriment, but not let it jade me. And, you know, just to remember to smile and ask questions and treat people like you want to be treated. You know, we don't have to like make it so esoteric or overcomplicated. I think it's like be kind, be good. Like, just ask people how they're doing. I mean, it's as simple as that. As simple as like opening the door open for somebody, you know? Like, you can get deeper down the rabbit hole, but simple ways of just being a good person in the world is just to like lead with your heart.
Absolutely. Sarah?
Well, on your podcast, we talked about the golden rule.
We did.
Absolutely my favorite. Do not treat people the way they treat you. Treat them the way you'd like to be treated. Even when people and the world is horrible, like stay warm and kind, because when you harden up, other people do too. And I think that never get jaded is really important. Be kind to yourself and others, and surround yourself with really good friends. I mean, Jen's one of my best friends, and we send each other memes all day long and laugh all the time. And I just, yeah, like really laughing every day is a great balance to everything.
I love it. I love it. Thank you guys for doing this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yay.